afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 34th edition of the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series brought to you by the University of the Philippines and the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation. I'm Dr. Raymond Francis Sarmiento, and today we have a very special topic, and it's really the buzzword nowadays, what with Pfizer and Moderna and BioNTech and all of the work that they have been doing during this past few months. And as always, I'm very happy to share hosting duties with the Special Envoy of the President for Global Health Initiatives, my partner in crime, who's looking good today, Dr. Susie Pineda Mercado. Dr. Susie.
Hi, Raymond, and I just want to say hello to everybody who's joining us on the live webinar and on the playback on YouTube. We've got an exciting topic today. We've got great speakers. We're going to talk about the COVID-19 vaccines, what are the plans for the country, and get to understand and do a little bit of a deep dive on what we can expect. I think expectations are very high, and so I think very important for us to know the facts, to understand the science, so that we are realistic about our expectations about what the vaccine can do. So stay with us. We have a lot of great speakers today. Raymond, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Susie. And as Dr. Susie mentioned, we really have an excellent lineup of speakers for today. But I'll just share with you the format that we have, especially for those who are joining us for the very first time. There will be a series of presentations from our resource persons and followed by a panel discussion. And afterwards, that is when we will be entertaining your questions in the Q&A session. But before we proceed, let me take this opportunity to acknowledge everyone behind the very hardworking team of the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series from the University of the Philippines System, from the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation, the UP Manila National Telehealth Center, the UP Manila National Institute of Health, the College of Medicine, the Philippine General Hospital. We also would not be here without the technical support of the UP Information Technology Development Center and also TVUP. For those who are watching us over in YouTube, either in live stream or maybe watching us later on in the playback, sigurado po nandun po kayo sa YouTube channel ng Internet Television Network of the Philippines, which is TVUP. So maraming salamat po for joining us and becoming part of our global community of learners. Go over to you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, so Raymond, we're asking people to tell us where they're watching from. We have those who are watching from Iloilo City, from Catanduanes. Ano ba yung nakita ko? So please write down where you are so that we can greet you. And truly, we've got extensive reach for the webinar, and hopefully we will have Cagayan de Oro, no? Hopefully today we'll have a lot of people who are really interested in finding out how they're going to participate in any rollout of a vaccine that will happen for COVID-19. So Raymond, are you going to say something about the certificates first?
Oh, thank you for reminding me, Dr. Susie. Not that I needed any reminding because we continue to have questions either via direct message in our social media accounts and over via email. But for those who are asking, do you provide e-certificates? When should we expect e-certificates? Answer to the first question is yes, as long as you have spent at least 50% of the webinar duration. Dito po sa loob ng Zoom webinar, na nandito po kayo, you would be receiving along with your electronic certificate na signed po by the various agencies involved, a copy of the presentations po from our resource persons. And please expect the e-certificates po to be handed out. We had a problem po kasi with the mass distribution of those electronic certificates. So we have cap it to a particular number in terms of the limit of the number of certificates that we could hand out each and every day. So thank you for your patience and understanding. And we hope that you will continue on to join us in our webinars. For those who have been masugid po na tumatangkilik sa ating webinar series, this will serve as our second to the last webinar of the year. But we hope to continue it at the start of the year po next year. And we hope that you will continue to join us as we move forward through this pandemic. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Raymond, nakakatakot naman yung sinabi mong second to the last. Makakala nila wala na tayo. Second to last
For the
kasi
year, for the year.
we're gonna have a bit of a Christmas break. So we have today and then we have one more session on Friday, and after that we take a break until the middle of January. But again, okay, so we're greeting people who are in Cagayan de Oro, Coronadal City, Pangasinan, Muntinlupa, Bukidnon, UP Diliman Campus, gosh. Okay, Los Baños, Laguna, Quirino Province, Quezon City, more from Laguna, from Aklan. Okay, UPCM 89 classmates of our opening speaker. Okay, so welcome all, no? Also yung mga taga UE, UERMN from QMMC. Okay, so we've got a high-powered lineup of speakers for you, starting with none other than the Executive Director of the National Institutes of Health. I would like to welcome to the webinar Dr. Eva Cutiongco Dela Paz. Eva, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Ma'am Susie, and thank you, Raymond. Thank you for inviting the National Institutes of Health to this webinar on a very timely topic. And we do have an illustrious panel of speakers that will be featured in this webinar. Thank you.
Go ahead and give your introduction.
Officials of the University of the Philippines, distinguished guest speakers, colleagues, friends, and attendees, including my classmates from Class 89 UP College of Medicine. Welcome to this special edition webinar brought to you by the collective efforts of the University of the Philippines Systems, National Institutes of Health, UP College of Medicine, the Philippine General Hospital, and PhilHealth. Magandang araw. The World Health Organization reports that we currently have for more than 25 life-threatening and debilitating diseases, vaccines for those such as measles, typhoid, rotavirus, and polio, to name a few. Vaccine development is a long, complex process, often lasting for a decade or even more, to ensure that vaccines are safe and effective. Today, the global community is called into action to develop a vaccine for COVID-19 in a much shorter span of time to stop COVID deaths, as the title of this webinar says. Research plays a vital role in vaccine development as it paves the way for the discovery of novel vaccines to address old and existing as well as emerging infectious diseases. The first stages are exploratory in nature and involves laboratory and animal studies. This exploratory stage involves basic laboratory research where scientists identify natural or synthetic antigens that might help prevent or treat a disease. This is followed by preclinical studies where tissue culture or cell culture systems are used and animal testing is done to assess the safety of the candidate vaccine and its ability to provoke an immune response. These studies also give researchers an idea of the cellular responses they might expect in humans and also about a safe starting dose and safe method to administer the vaccine for the next phases of research. The goal of phase 1 is to assess the safety of the candidate vaccine and to determine type and extent of immune response in a small group of adults, usually less than 100. A promising phase 1 progresses to phase 2 to study the candidate vaccine safety, immunogenicity, proposed doses, schedule, and method of delivery involving several hundreds of participants. Phase 3 involves thousands and tens of thousands of people, which are randomized and double-blind studies to assess vaccine safety. Even after the vaccine is released to the public, this is followed by post-licensure monitoring and phase 4 to continue testing again vaccine for safety and efficacy. This is just a nutshell on the amount of research work poured into vaccine development. Resounding words in research efforts are safety, 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 and of course, efficacy. These will all be discussed in this webinar by our experts as all of these steps happened and are happening at a much accelerated time frame because of the pandemic. Regulation and oversight increase as the candidate vaccine makes its way through the process. So before vaccine clinical trials can proceed, regulatory agencies such as the FDA perform stringent review of the trial protocols submitted by clinical research organizations or pharmaceutical companies. This is to ensure that the scientific merit of the clinical trial is appropriately assessed and established, the safety of participants and volunteers is considered, and informed consent is obtained following ethical guidelines. In our country, the FDA Philippines has engaged the UP National Institutes of Health to serve as one of its regulatory reviewers through FDA Circular 2012-007, which led to the creation of the NIH FDA Review Panel in 2012. In August of this year, FDA Director General Dr. Eric Domingo has designated the NIH FDA Review Panel to be the sole regulatory reviewer of all incoming clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccines in the country. Since last month, COVID vaccine protocols screened by the Vaccine Expert Panel headed by one of our speakers, Dr. Gloriani, has started to come in. The NIH FDA review panel has reviewed 2 of the 6 clinical trial protocols for COVID vaccine candidates and already submitted its recommendations to FDA. In the very near future, the National Institutes of Health UP Manila will have its Animal Research Center with a Biosafety Level 3 facility, a center committed to highest standard of animal care as it pursues critical medical research which will promote evidence-based research with animal experiments seeking novel treatments and vaccines for various diseases. Hopefully, opened by early 2022 is the NIH Clinical Research Center, envisioned as a key resource for clinical researchers providing infrastructure, personnel, and technical support to conduct end-to-end clinical trials of candidate vaccines and novel drugs. This is in close partnership with our faculty, experts, and trialists at the Philippine General Hospital, and most importantly, our patient population. With this preface, I hope that this morning's webinar would serve as an impetus for us to start improving and enhancing our capacity to develop our own vaccine, not just for COVID-19 pandemic, but for other infectious diseases as well. Our perspective should be self-reliance and self-sufficiency in the long term. And I hope that with academic, government, and private partnerships, we can speed up the realization of this lofty goal para sa bayan. Muli, magandang araw po sa ating lahat. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Thank you very much. That was Eva Cutiongco Dela Paz, the head of the National Institutes of Health, Executive Director, and congratulations. She just announced to us that they are officially designated as the reviewers of the vaccines for the Food and Drug Administration. So congratulations. I know that's a huge burden and a lot of work, but I have great faith in our scientists, and I think your contribution to this whole process is just so important for the whole country. So congratulations. So Eva, please join us for the panel later, because we'll have a discussion, and we'd like to have you on the panel. Okay, yes. So Raymond, yeah, thank you. So Raymond, you have some opinion poll ba tawag natin? Fun questions.
Yes, both, Dr. Susie. But first and foremost po, thank you to my boss, NIH Executive Director, Eva Cutiongco Dela Paz, for that inspiring message po. And I hope all of our attendees will continue to watch this until the very end of this webinar. The poll questions po are being flashed on the screen. This is really just a fun quiz, just trying to get your opinion on the 3 questions that we have in front of us. I'll read them as we move forward. Number 1, a vaccine that has 94% efficacy means option A, of 100 vaccinated in a trial, 94 do not get COVID. Option B, 94% of vaccinated or protected for life. Option C, 6 out of 100 will surely die of COVID. And option D, all of the above. So really, we just want to get your opinion kung ano po ang pagkakaintindi po natin sa 94% efficacy. Moving on to question number 2. Herd immunity can be achieved when 80% are vaccinated against COVID-19. That is option A. Option B, herd immunity is permanent. Option C po, herd immunity is readily attained within a year after vaccination. And option D, wala po sa mga nabanggit. At this point po, I'd like to take this opportunity to greet our attendees who have registered all the way po from the Municipal Health Office, Nagtipunan, Quirino, Cagayan Valley. So while I'm reading and acknowledging all of this po, please continue to key in your answers po. We also have those from Angeles University Foundation Medical Center in Pampanga, Angeles City po, and then the Health Centrum from Rojas City in Western Visayas, and Malay-Balay Medical Hospital Care in Bukidnon in Northern Mindanao. We also have a WHO office watching us, and it's not from the Philippines, it's from Indonesia. So we also have the Takeda Development Center Asia, Singapore. From California in Fountain Valley, the Memorial Care Orange Coast Medical Center. Another one from the United States in North Carolina, this time from Onslow Memorial Hospital in Jacksonville. We have the Spring Hills Park Ridge Assisted Living Facility in New Jersey, United States, and the Mission Hospital, Mission Viejo in California. So maraming salamat po. I know it's late at night wherever you are at that part of the world po. And we're very happy and appreciative that you are taking the time to join us. And then finally, for our last question in the opinion poll, target groups for the first round of vaccination against COVID-19 are, mukhang may mga alam na po ang ating attendees. Option A, health workers and older persons at risk. Option B, children below 5 years old. Option C, the policymakers and political leaders. And option D, all of the above. So maraming salamat po sa mga nag-join po dito sa ating opinion poll, and we'll try to take a gander and attempt to answer all of these towards the end of the webinar. Over to you, Dr. Susie, to introduce our very first speaker.
Thank you very much, Raymond. So we have some more who are logging in where they're coming from. Let me just add the Office of the Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, Binangonan, Rizal, Bacolod, Queen of Mary Hospital in Bacolod City, Mariveles District Hospital in Bataan. So truly, so many people are watching around the country, and as promised, we have a power-packed lineup of speakers. Now, we had originally invited our vaccine czar, Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr., to join us. And he was all set to join us. However, he is on the peace process. He's one of the leaders in the peace process, and something came up. But you will not be disappointed, because the presentation is going to be made by none other than the Special Advisor of the National Task Force on COVID-19, Executive Vice President of the University of the Philippines, and someone who's always been with us on the webinar. So we'd like to welcome back to the webinar to explain the Philippine COVID-19 vaccine roadmap on behalf of the Chair of the COVID-19 Incident Command, Secretary Carlito Galvez. Let's welcome Dr. Ted Herbosa. Ted, welcome.
Thank you,
to the
Susan,
webinar.
and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the viewers of this webinar. Congratulations also. I think you're ending this season soon, and in behalf of our vaccine czar and chief implementer, Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr., I'd like to present the Philippines COVID-19 vaccine roadmap. Is my screen sharing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
So for this short presentation, I'll discuss three things: the global status of vaccine development of COVID-19, the present Philippine COVID-19 national vaccine roadmap as it is being crafted and made, and issues on public-private partnerships, which is one of the first that has happened in terms of the pre-procurement of vaccines to become available for the Philippines. So where do we stand in vaccine development? I think the other speakers will talk more about this, but as of November 24, there are 12 vaccines, candidate vaccines that are on phase 3 clinical trials. I think I've only read the Pfizer report on it. The others still haven't published, but they all, of course, have press releases of what they are. But take note, down the line of the 12 are vaccine candidates that have stars. And when they have a star, this has already been approved in their specific countries for specific use. Sinovac, Sinopharms in China, Sinobio, Gamaleya in Russia, and the Bharat Biotech Vector in India. So, because of the speed in which these vaccines have been researched, developed, and planned to be manufactured, apparently the scary part is there will be a shortfall by 2021 because of the high demand and the limitations of manufacturing all these vaccines and distribution as well. So if you look at the global population of about 7.8, the manufacturing companies can only produce for 2021. By the year end of 2021, their promised production is only for about 5.6 billion persons. So there is a shortfall of the availability of vaccines, almost 2.2 billion. If you look at the pre-booked or pre-purchased vaccines, that means they're being manufactured and to be delivered, 80% of these vaccines have been already procured by rich countries, and only 15% the pre-booked for about 15% of the global population. So this is already being rolled out. I think you saw the UK already injecting their healthcare professionals. I have my colleague friends in the UK, happily congratulating each other for the first dose that's been given the other day. So in this graph, the Chinese, the Russian, and the Indian vaccines aren't included. So it will probably be bigger if you actually included them. So these are the countries. It's definitely a race. It's been a very fast phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 development for all these vaccines. I think the prize money is very large. That's why the race is there. And of course, the need to actually make a difference. So these are the different ways wherein the vaccines have been developed, many ways being developed, and their commitments to the different countries and the total doses and the populations that the countries have pre-ordered already. So all these deals have been happening since the middle of this year, even before the approvals for the vaccines have come out. In Southeast Asia, the vaccine planning has also been very active, and sad to say, the Philippines is again left behind because we have no legal mandate to actually pre-procure vaccines until recently, when there was an executive order to allow this advanced procurement methodology. So Vietnam has pre-registered for 50 to 150 million doses of the Russian vaccine, and they're also available for the COVAX facility of WHO. Thailand is the same. They've reserved for 26 million. I think they're about 60 million from. So they've reserved from AstraZeneca, and they've also prepared the budget. Singapore is the same. They've taken already, put out their money where their mouth is. The Philippines, we've actually just put out 2.6 million doses. That's what we've pre-procured, but that's because of the private sector putting out the money for the pre-procurement. If they hadn't done that, then I think only half of that will go to government. So Malaysia, but we've already made arrangements with ADB and World Bank for a loan facility. So we are available, and that's where the president's statement comes from, that we have the money to buy the vaccines. But the problem is all the vaccines have been pre-ordered by the rich countries with money. Malaysia as well is here, listed with the amount of vaccines that they will buy, and the budget is $244 million. Indonesia, in fact, and Indonesia WHO is actually listening here, and they've also done an advanced supply with AstraZeneca and the Chinese vaccines. So they're also available with the WHO COVAX facility. So for the president really understands this, that the vaccine is very important and that there is a race to get a safe and effective vaccine. And when that happens, it should be made available to both the rich and the poor nations alike as part of equity. And he included this in his UN speech in September. And he states further that by October, he said, I have the money for the vaccine, but hahanap pa ako ng maraming pera, but I will look for more money because, there are 130 million Filipinos, and to me, ideally, all should have a vaccine without exception. So this is the process of the roadmap as conceptualized by our vaccine Czar and the team that's been helping him. So the first are the key considerations of choosing what vaccines we will procure and deliver to the people. So you'll, of course, number one, the people will speaking next will talk about safety and efficacy, the sensitivity of the population to actually be able to be vaccinated, the world supply and demand, not only of the vaccines, but the vaccine paraphernalia as well, the syringes that you need to actually inject them. And then the complexity of the supply chain, especially with the freezer chain requirements by some of the candidate vaccines. And then the concept of prioritization and distribution of who will eventually get the vaccines first, and of course the results of the clinical trials. The next are the 7 stages that have been identified that the country needs to go through. So the first stage is also already ongoing. We have the groups here to the scientific experts to evaluate the results of phase 3 trials in other countries and the methodology used by the vaccine company. Second is really a problem of access and acquisition to availability of the vaccines. And number 3 is the procurement and financing process. Number 4 is really the production, delivery, shipment, and storage of these vaccines. And then the distribution and deployment of the vaccine program, implementation of the nationwide vaccination campaign, and then an assessment, evaluation, and monitoring of that program. Of course, the end state result should be being able to deliver safe, equitable, cost-effective immunization of the large population of Filipinos and full recovery of the economy because of the availability of immunity and sustainable immunization that will continue to go on even after 2021. So if you look at the current stages, stage 1, the scientific evaluation has been ongoing. The lead that has been put here is the Department of Science and Technology, together with the Department of Health and the Vaccine Expert Panel, which has been created. I think Nina is a member of the Vaccine Expert Panel. Number 2 is the access and acquisition, which is partly the job of the Department of Foreign Affairs, as there are multilateral and bilateral negotiations happening with other governments. The DOF for the loans with the Asian Development Bank and the DBP, and of course DBN for the final procurement, and of course the recommendations of the Vaccine Expert Panel. The procurement process with the procurement service of the Department of Budget and Management and the Department of Finance. Now, the next part, really, which will happen sometime starting next year, has to be prepared even early on. And this is really the logistics and supply question of a vaccine program. And we have a task group at the National Task Force. It's called the Task Group for Resource Management and Logistics. The TGRML group has been the ones allocating the test kits and allocating the PPEs since the beginning of this particular. And then the specific group will now be created to talk about the logistics and supply issues of the current vaccines that will be put in the portfolio. Number 6 will be the program implementation. And this is actually the hard part, having worked at the Department of Health. The vaccines itself may be effective, but what is more important is your campaign or program, which needs to be implemented correctly. So many moving parts that are needed to work and coordinate correctly, that the supplies, the vaccinators, the cold chain are all existing by the time you roll it out. And then, of course, the assessment and evaluation of that particular program for the country. So this is like the timelines that we're looking at. These are very optimistic timelines. I will be honest, these are very optimistic timelines, barring any problems. No, so the assessment and evaluation will be continuous all the way to 2024. Of course, the planning is happening now, and hopefully up to the second quarter, all of these stages will be fixed in terms of each stage planned very well. And then the preparation of the national vaccination program, which I think will happen sometime in the third quarter of next year and all the way to the fourth quarter. We've already seen the delays, especially in the phase 3 trials. I hope there will be no more delays in its delivery. And as you can see, the plan of the government is to have a portfolio of different vaccines as recommended by the Vaccine Expert Panel. So we won't be dependent on 1 or 2 vaccines. We hope to have a whole portfolio available to the government, available to the private sector, and available to all Filipinos. So these are the critical activities that need to happen. First is this critical assessment of really what vaccines we should actually procure. So the other countries have approved the BioNTech, Pfizer. Is that really applicable in the Philippine setting where we don't have the freezer chain to actually supply it to very remote islands of the country? So there are many considerations other than just safety and efficacy, but also the implementation. And then the concomitant risks, the decision points will be decided by the experts. And of course, the planning is very important. I think all of you know that the vaccination program needs to be well done. Otherwise, we will have complications and missteps. And then there's a lot of preparation because the scheme involves government to government negotiations, government to private company negotiations and contracts, financing systems wherein we will have to take a loan and find out how to pay back that loan to get everyone vaccinated, the existence of the supply chain with the help of the private sector, and the personal information system, something to facilitate, make sure that people get the 2 doses, not only just one, or be able to track them that they'll be given the second dose at the right time. And then the strategic communications to prepare the local government on the availability, on what vaccines are and which ones there are. And of course, the important thing about the execution itself, which involves the procurement process, the production, manufacture, shipment, storage, distribution, implementation of the vaccine, and then redeployment of the vaccines. So these are the critical timelines. This November, December, we hope that this roadmap is already approved by the IATF and the national cluster on this is the 3rd cluster that has been put on our National Action Plan 3. NAP 3 was conceptualized with 2 big groups, the health response, which is the continued pandemic response led by the Department of Health, and the economic recovery, which is led by the NEDA and the Department of Finance. So we need the first phase to happen, the expert panels being able to evaluate which ones we will actually procure, analysis of all this and the clinical trials that have been done in other countries, and of course the local solidarity trials and phase 3 trials that are implemented by the different vaccine candidates willing to sell to the Philippines. And by the first quarter next year, hopefully procurement will happen, and there will be early planning for the distribution, and the implementation plan is on track. And then if there is a requirement for construction of additional cold storage facilities in regional hospitals, then that has to happen before the arrival of those vaccines. So what are the things we have done? As a government, we have engaged government-to-government discussions on their specific vaccines with the ambassadors of these particular countries, United Kingdom for the AstraZeneca program, Australia, China, of course, Russia, South Korea, India, Israel, Singapore, Germany, and the US. And there are some kind of arrangements that are happening. The first one, of course, you've heard of, was the signing of the tripartite agreement, a public-private partnership between the tycoons, the British government and company AstraZeneca, and the Philippine government. Then we are also talking with the government-to-government transactions, probably to be procured by ADB after the agreement is done in terms of how to procure this. And then there are also discussions with Indonesia and the US, of course. And of course, there are other multilateral pools that are being talked about, like an ASEAN pooling system, the ADB to help us with the quick procurement, and also the WHO facility of vaccine procurement, which is also available to most countries. So this is the concept of deployment. The president wants equitable access for the poor and the indigents. So those who cannot afford it will be given access to government funds. The frontliners in the public hospitals, the healthcare workers, the uniformed people, the frontline government agencies. And then all Filipinos should have the vaccine without exception. And then so it's really a campaign to be able to vaccinate and build the economy. So the strategy has been to start the vaccination program in focused areas. So basically the areas where we had hotspots, which is the National Capital Region, Region 4A, Region 3, Davao, Cebu, Cagayan de Oro, Bacolod City, Iloilo, Zamboanga. So these were the areas where there were hotspots. So we would add on to the people who already had the immunity, add on a focused geographic location to really go for a certain herd immunity of that particular geographic location. And of course, very important to prioritize, because the vaccines we will get will not be enough for everyone. It will have to come in phases. And the first priorities are, of course, the indigents and the healthcare workers. And then we have multiple access as well to become available. In fact, the concept of the cold chain for, let's say, the Pfizer, which requires a -70, is that those storage should probably be in big hospitals where they already have some kind of freezer, that it will be made available to the private sector through those big private hospitals. For the public, we have to contend with probably the vaccine candidates that have the minimum 2 to 8 degrees refrigeration alone. So these are some of the current statistics of where we are with COVID-19. We're actually decelerating. We have a -2.212% decrease in terms of all the numbers being reported. Our case fatality rate is, I think, 3 point something. And true enough, we are in deceleration, but we are ready to have our second wave soon, maybe after Christmas, and hopefully by middle of next year get the vaccines again. So this is how we prioritize the vaccines. These are the prioritization of who would actually be, and the populations estimated by DOH in the immunization program there, on who will be getting. So this is how we estimated the total number of vaccines. It should only be, for the first phase, about 22% of our population. And then this is the rest of the other people that we need to vaccinate: the teachers, the social workers, the government workers, the other essential workers that are exposed to this, and overseas Filipino workers, etc. Okay, so this is the organizational setup that I'm talking about. The National Action Plan Phase 3 puts us into 3 clusters. There is the response cluster, where I work with the USEC Vega to talk about the response, the health response to the outbreak, to the epidemic or the pandemic. And then there's the recovery cluster led by NEDA, really making sure that the economy recovers by next year. And in the middle, we now have the vaccine cluster, which is led by the vaccine Czar, Secretary Galvez. And these are the different existing components. There will be an EXECOM, of course, the NITAG, the National NITAG is an advisory group, the National Immunization and Technical Advisory Group of the DOH. This is already existing, so we'd like to set it up. And because of the UHC law, we developed an HTAC, Health Technology Assessment Council, which will play a role. And always, of course, we like to look at safety, so we need to set up this National Adverse Events for Immunization Council, so that all of them can be followed up and reported. In fact, I think one of the things we need to build, because of the speed we've developed vaccines, is really to have some kind of vaccine court in the Philippines, or some kind of fund to take care of people that have complications out of this very quickly developed and implemented vaccines. So this is our way forward. These are things that have already been approved. So before, we could not pre-procure because our procurement law prohibits us to do that. So the way around it was, we entered into advanced market procurements through an order by the executive department. So this will be the legal basis to pre-order. And then you've heard about the public-private partnership with the tycoons and the government and AstraZeneca. And then most recently, you heard that the president also approved FDA, Director General, and the authority to be able to issue similar emergency use authority for the new candidate vaccine, so that we can have them earlier. This has been the ranking given by the vaccine expert panel. There are 3 major types of vaccine: the inactivated virus, the protein subunit, the viral vector using the adenovirus, and the mRNA vaccines. So this is how they classified it in terms of availability. I think you'll hear more of this from Professor Gloriani. And these are the different modes of financing that's available. So direct procurement through our procurement act, multilateral loan with ADB and World Bank, bilateral loans with the government, and private sector through tripartite agreements. So this is the preparation. We're planning to have a vaccine logistics summit, and this is to identify the issues on logistics and supply management. So this will be held on December 16th to really get all the private sector involved in the requirements for end-to-end distribution of the vaccine all over the country. Another thing that's been set up by Secretary Galvez, and apologies to the analogy to war, but basically I think when you look at how vaccines are delivered, it's actually very similar to a war operation wherein everything has to be delivered all at the same time with the operation. So the analogy is there, the prioritization, the administration, the distribution of supplies, and the communications for the public sector. So these are the different subgroups, and we don't bore you anymore with these details, and hope that they will all be successful with the vaccination program and the roadmap, and we will not be safe until everyone is safe, and the President's clarion call for a global equitable access to vaccines. Thank you very much. Back to you, Susie and Raymond.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ted Robosa, the Executive Vice President of the University of the Philippines and Special Advisor to the National Task Force. Ted, I know you won't be able to join us for the Q&A, but I would just like to ask you to give a message to the people who are on the webinar. So as you know, we have doctors and nurses all over the Philippines who are listening, and we're close to 500 people now on the webinar. I think there's great interest. So what are your parting words to them? How should they be preparing? So we do know that we are all in a very early phase. There will still be your logistics summit, planning, and so on. But is there something that the hospitals out there should start doing, knowing that healthcare workers, frontline workers will be first on the list as a priority?
That's a very good question, Susie. And I think what's important is really for the private sector to step up the plate. I am seeing that as the UK, the US approves the emergency use authorization of some of these candidate vaccines, and as we're able to procure stuff from, let's say, China and Russia, I think the setup to be able to roll this out also with the private sector can be done. In fact, I have confidence that the private sector can roll it out among their personnel because they have the money and the resources and logistics to be able to set it up and be able to deliver. So that will be a great help because the government will, of course, target the public healthcare workers. They'll look at the big DOH hospitals, and probably those are the places where the vaccine will probably go first. But that doesn't stop the private sector from acquiring it themselves with the different portfolio vaccines that will be given approval by the FDA of the Philippines. So I think it's really going to be public-private partnerships. The sooner we get to a majority of the population vaccinated, I think the hope is the sooner we can get the economy back going. So that's the dual role of this vaccine program. But my last reminder is, even if we do that, I think we should never forget the prevention part of controlling disease. We have gotten to where we are without a vaccine. We have lowered our acceleration of vaccine by the use of face masks, preventing mass gatherings, hand washing, all of these activities. We're also sacrificing our Christmas parties by not holding it anymore. And I think people shouldn't forget that. Even when you get the first dose or the second dose of the vaccine, you still have to practice the minimum public health measures that will prevent viral transmission. So that's my message. Minimum public health standards do work, and it has worked. It's gotten us to this point, And we need to continue that, whether the vaccine is there or not. Thank you very much, Susie.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ted Robosa. Thank you. And also, we send our thanks to Secretary Galvez. We hope one day he can update us when things are moving already. But we'd like to thank you and to thank you for your time on the webinar. It's been very informative. I think people have been waiting to hear this. And I'm sure there will be many more who will be watching this webinar on the playback. Thank you very much, Ted. Okay, so we're going to our next speaker, and we have the former Dean of the UP College of Public Health, who is the lead on the vaccine expert panel. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Nina Gloriani. Ma'am Nina, welcome.
Good afternoon, Dr. Susie and all the organizers, Dr. Teddy. Thank you for that very informative talk. I'm very amazed with how the task force has put all of this together. So I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. So my talk will be, sorry, I have to make this smaller.
We can see it, Dean
Okay
Nina.
na.
Okay na. Yes, ma'am.
Slideshow is better, I think. Okay, so mine is more the scientific side. So I just entitled it Vaccines for COVID-19. So just for an outline, just to refresh you again on the global cases and Philippine cases, but I'll deal more with the steps in vaccine development, the types of vaccines, and the selection of vaccine antigens, a little into the preclinical to the clinical vaccine development, and then the vaccine profiles tested. I think 1 or 2 slides for each: safety, immunogenicity, and efficacy. The evaluation process actually is more of the approval, and then some take-home messages. So we're still looking at many countries is still in the dark, either blue or red. So as of this is December 10, in the WHO dashboard, we have around 69 million cases globally. And in the Philippines, we have around 445,540 cases as of today. Then this is actually just this morning. So we have had all our public health responses to the pandemic, and these are all strategic public health interventions that have probably really helped in bringing us to where we are now. We have sort of, I think, plateaued or flattened now. But vaccines against the COVID-19 are seen as an important tool that will help stop the pandemic. And currently, there are 52 vaccines in clinical trials, and 12 are in phase 3, and 162 in preclinical development. That number changes so much every day, or maybe even by the hour. So anyway, I'll have to go through some of the steps in vaccine development so that everybody will understand why we chose some of these candidates. Well, we have to recognize first that this is a distinct entity. And right now we have a lot of information about COVID-19, and we draw our, how we actually plan even our vaccine development along what we know about the disease itself. So we identify and characterize the etiologic agent, and this happened many months ago. So the SARS-CoV-2 was isolated, and the genetic sequence made publicly available in January 2020. And this allowed this pandemic speed by which these vaccines, especially the messenger RNA vaccines, were developed. So you have to grow the agent, the virus, in the laboratory. Either you inactivate or attenuate the agent in the laboratory, or choose antigens. So by attenuation and inactivation, I mean this: you have to use cell cultures to grow the virus, because you need that virus, a lot of them, to be made into the vaccine. So either the virus may be weakened so as not to cause disease, but still able to stimulate the immune response. So this is what we call the live attenuated vaccine. Or you can inactivate the virus. So this one still has the nucleic acid viable. So it's allowing the virus to replicate, although in an attenuated or weakened form. But this one, the inactivated, or maybe more precisely, killed virus, can be achieved, this inactivation, by physical or chemical inactivation. So the antigens are intact, but you destroy the nucleic acid. So it cannot replicate anymore. Now, either you use the whole virus or parts of it. And in the case of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, the spike proteins have been identified as crucial to protection. So you have here the structure of the virus, or there are many other, you have the envelope protein, the matrix protein, the nucleocapsid protein. But the spike protein is very important and critical because it is the one that will bind to the ACE2 receptor on host cells. So this becomes, the spike has become the most preferred vaccine candidate by many vaccine developers. So if you look at this, so you have here, if you know well, we know now the genetic sequence of this spike protein that can be inserted into a virus vector. So some of the vaccine candidates that I will show later uses the virus vector adenovirus, so that the sequence for the spike is inserted, and it is the virus together with the spike sequence that will enter the host cells and induce the immune response. Or the entire, this one, the spike itself can be purified, fragmented, or uh, done developed by recombinant DNA technology. So you end up having a subunit vaccine. So just this particular spike will be the immunogen. So, and then because we now know the nucleic acid sequence, either the DNA sequence, the corresponding complementary DNA sequence, because this is an RNA sequence, or directly the messenger RNA, that can also be used to be one of the vaccine candidates, as Moderna and Pfizer would be the examples for that. So anyway, before any of these vaccine candidates are actually tested, there has to be an animal model for the disease. Well, for COVID-19, there is really no very specific animal model, but they are using marmosets and ferrets. And of course, we usually would always use the non-human primates or the rhesus macaques. But the other smaller animals are used for testing immunogenicity. Then for these vaccines, we have to identify an immunologic correlate for immunity to the disease. Usually this is antibody-based, but it is possible to also test cells like the T cells. So once we have all this, it is now possible to evaluate the candidate vaccine or vaccines for safety, immunogenicity, and efficacy. And as already mentioned by Dr. Eva Cutiongco, all of these vaccines will go through preclinical development in the laboratory and in animals. And when data are good enough, they will proceed to the clinical trials by phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 3 being the efficacy, or when we actually measure the protection that the vaccine will confer against COVID-19 vaccines. Well, through it all, you have to prepare the candidate vaccine following good manufacturing procedures. So this will put together some of these vaccine platforms. So this is the virus. You have the whole inactivated, or this is also whole, but it is live attenuated vaccine, or those that will express only the spike protein, is the spike, via the recombinant viral vectors, recombinant bacterial vectors, or directly through the nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA. And sometimes you can also use synthetic peptides. There are actually some vaccine candidates that use the synthetic peptide platform. So we have right now, well, this is as of, so we have them all listed here. These are RNA vaccines, DNA, recombinant protein vaccines, vectored vaccines, inactivated and live attenuated. So as of November 12, there were 11, but I said there are already 12 as of yesterday. So among these 11, we have actually the vaccine expert panel already evaluated 5 of them. So Clover, which is a subunit vaccine, AstraZeneca, Oxford, Gamaleya from Russia, and Janssen are all virus vector vaccines, mainly adenovirus vectored vaccines, and Sinovac, which is inactivated vaccines. That is the reason why Dr. Teddy Herbosa came up with the list, because we actually prepared a matrix in selecting these vaccines based on many parameters. Okay. So, well, just to go back to the requirements for the vaccine to reach the humans and to be actually licensed eventually. So, you go through the preclinical phase, exploratory phase. This is where you actually choose the antigens that will be most successful in, eventually be successful in producing the response that you want. Then going through the animal studies, then phase one, safety on a small number of individuals. For safety, maybe some dose requirements already, some dosing tests already. Phase two is an expanded phase where you have more participants. Like for phase one, it's about 10 to 100. For phase two, you can have 100 to 1,000. But for phase three, you need thousands and thousands of people to test the efficacy of the vaccine, including the safety. Now, I just had to put this also because please do not forget that all of these products will have to have GMP grade or certification. So, vaccines are tested for three things generally. For number one, first and foremost is of course safety. We're looking at local and systemic side effects, adverse events. Sometimes we use the term reactogenicity or tolerability. They usually are mild, may be moderate, or they may be severe. I think you've heard about the anaphylaxis cases in the UK vaccination just recently, but these are rare side effects. So we have common versus rare side effects or adverse events like this severe allergic response. And if we know these people are allergic to many other things, they should not be candidates for clinical trials or even for vaccination. So for the second profile or the parameter that we use, you have to look at the immune markers of protection. And generally, as I said, we test for antibodies. We do binding immunoglobulin G assays, look at titers or the concentration or levels or magnitude of antibody responses. Is it high, low, or moderate? We look at seroconversion rates. So from the first dose to the second dose, they should produce more antibodies after, say, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and so on. So different vaccines have different ways of, they have different study protocols testing these immunogenicity parameters. But most of all, we are looking at neutralizing antibodies. So here in this slide, I'm just showing some of the tests that are used. These are quantitative tests for immunoglobulin G especially. Then here is a virus neutralization assay that may use pseudovirus or the wild-type virus. So these all have to be set up in the laboratory. And we have to really look at their data on the neutralizing antibodies because that's the one we want to make sure are present. Then I don't know if this might be very technical for some, but we do look for the results on cytokine assays. You know, your T cells, siguro a lot of you already are familiar with the T cells. Meron tayong T helper cells, so meron tayong Th1 and Th2 balanced responses. They have to be balanced, but actually we prefer the Th1 responses better. So it's like you have to weigh them. So we very, very closely look at these results of when the vaccine documents are submitted to us. Now, these last two, some of the vaccine developers actually have some data on their cell-mediated immune responses in terms of type of T cells activated. So using flow cytometry and then cytotoxic T cell or T cell proliferation assays. But not everyone because there are minimum measurements to look for. Now for the third one, the last, but of course not the least, is efficacy, or what we mean as protection against COVID-19 disease. The efficacy or protection can be against severe COVID-19, and we probably would like that more than any of these. But if it can protect against severe, moderate, mild, and even reduce virus shedding and transmission, that will be the best. So anyway, I'd like to again share with you the 4 vaccine developers who have actually made press releases about their vaccine efficacy. So 2 were the ones who initially made the press release. Pfizer and Moderna are both messenger RNA types of vaccines. Take note, Pfizer tested about 43,500 and Moderna 30,000. They only released the interim results of this phase 3, meaning half of the participants, the results from half of the participants is that the one they produced for the interim analysis. So 95% vaccine efficacy, almost the same, 94% for Moderna. Well, I just had to put some of these. VNC means those who got vaccinated had COVID, 8 of them, but those who did not get the vaccine, 162 got COVID. And if you look at severe COVID, the one with Pfizer, one who was vaccinated got severe COVID, but 9 in the placebo got the severe COVID. For Moderna, it was 0. So no one in the vaccine group got severe COVID, and 60 in the placebo group, or those who did not get the vaccine, got the severe form. For Gamaleya, which is an adenovirus 26 prime and adenovirus 5 boost regimen, encoding the spike proteins, they tested 19,000, and middle into that, they released an efficacy of about 91%, although we do not have the information for this, severity and between the vaccine and the placebo groups. And for AstraZeneca, they use another adenovirus, but this is the chimpanzee, that also encodes the spike proteins and tested about 23,000. With lower vaccine efficacy, but still at 70%, but still this is higher than what the WHO has required of at least 50%. So that is still good. So my last 2 slides, I think. So the COVID-19 vaccine candidates go through a very rigid evaluation. But let me just show you the approval process. For the VEP, the initial evaluation is done by the VEP, but the approval process is done by the FDA. So whatever the platform technology used to generate the COVID-19 vaccines, whether old, like the inactivated, or the subunit, or new generation technologies like messenger RNA, were used in vaccine production, the investigational vaccine product has to satisfy standard criteria and pass very stringent tests, from vaccine discovery to preclinical tests in vitro and in animals, and finally in human trials. So we want this FDA approval stamp on the vaccines that we will use. So my last slide for take-home messages. So you have heard and seen that for COVID-19, there are so many vaccine types to choose from. Vaccines developed using older, tried and tested technologies, as well as what we call new generation platforms. We have to take note that each vaccine type has its own safety, immunogenicity, and efficacy profiles. One vaccine may be good for a particular target group, like maybe the elderly or children or the general population, but we do need to study each of these separately. All these multiple approaches this work towards the same goal, that of producing a safe, effective vaccine against COVID-19. We are now in an era where a new field of microbiology and immunology, which we call vaccinology, gives us hope to develop better, safer, more effective vaccines to save lives against the most difficult pathogens, such as the SARS-CoV-2 that we now have. It is very likely, as Dr. Herbosa said, it is very likely that different vaccines, not just one type, will be needed for the pandemic response. And while fast-tracking vaccine development efforts, we call this pandemic speed in developing pandemic vaccines, the need for scientific rigor and integrity in approving vaccines for licensing and commercialization needs to be emphasized. With the technology, ethical and societal issues must also be considered, like access to the best, safest, most efficacious vaccines by those who need them most the soonest time possible. So with that, I end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, former Dean Dr. Nina Gloriani po, who leads po the vaccine expert panel. We really learned a lot. It's like being back in school, ma'am, with regards to the information that you provided. That, and I hope a lot of our attendees, most of our attendees, if not all, appreciated it also. There are a few questions coming in. There are ones in the Q&A. There are also ones being emailed, but we'll try to get to them in the panel discussion later on, Ma'am Nina. Maraming salamat po. Moving on po, we will be calling an infectious disease specialist. He is also the lead for the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials. He's none other than Dr. Jodor Lim. Dr. Lim, welcome po to the webinar.
Hi, Raymond. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. Please go ahead and share your screen with your presentation po. Thank you, TVUP. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Raymond. And for the organizers, thank you very much for the invitation to share with you some components of why we vaccinate. It makes my job very easy now because of what Dr. Ted shared and after what Dr. Nina shared. So we're talking about herd immunity and vaccination, in particular, what we'll be doing in the Philippines. Okay, so next slide. So basically, this is what we'll be doing: define herd immunity, how to achieve the herd immunity by natural infection. And we've seen how vaccines are developed. And we will focus basically on what has been tasked to our group, which is based the WHO Solidarity Vaccine Trial. So this is just an update. We'll share with you the landscape, the protocol, and the status. So it will be a very simple presentation because of what the other speakers have already done. So next slide. So herd immunity, or what we call indirect protection, community immunity, or community protection, these are reversible terms, refers to the protection of susceptible individuals against an infection when a sufficiently large proportion of immune individuals exist in a population. This has been very effective, as we have seen in the eradication of smallpox. And in the recent past, basically, we've used this. We immunize children for the Haemophilus influenza vaccine, HIV, and other people actually do not get the infection anymore because of the vaccination in children. The same holds true for strep pneumo infections in the older population. When we actually immunize those in the younger population children, the incidence of Streptococcus pneumoniae infection becomes much less in the older population. Next slide. So this is an example of, in figure A, you can see population with the population having a 5% positive antibodies. So if you look at the ones in red, that's the one who is infected, and the blue are uninfected. So this one person who is infected can eventually infect the whole group, except those who have been exposed to COVID in the past and they've had the antibodies. Okay, next slide. So there's a term we call herd immunity threshold. So we'll try to look at the formula, and you probably have seen these terms before. So the threshold is defined as the proportion of individuals in a population who, having acquired immunity, can no longer participate in the chain of infection. So this is dependent on the basic reproduction number. You've seen this, the R naught, which is the average number of persons infected by an infected individual in a fully susceptible population. And the calculation is such. So this threshold is 1 minus 1 over the R naught. For example, the R naught of SARS-CoV-2 is 2 to 3, or some would say 2.5 to 3.5, meaning one person who is infected can infect 2 to 2.5 to a size 3.5 persons. So the threshold, the immunity threshold will be computed as 1 minus, if you will say that the R naught is 2, then that's 1 minus 1/2, or if the R naught is 3, infecting 3 people, 1 minus 1 over 3, or roughly, you will see 1 minus 50%, or 1 minus 33%. So that gives you a herd immunity threshold of about 50 to 67%, which means if you have a heterogeneous population, the mixing is okay. You can actually develop herd immunity when you actually immunize roughly about 50 to 67%. So it's a very simple calculation, but when we look at the real world, it's not as simple as getting 50 to 67% developing the immunity against the SARS-CoV, and then that's it. We will not have the epidemic anymore. Okay, so next slide. So this is just a comparison of the threshold of the different disease entities. So on the x-axis, you will see there the R naught, no, which means how many is infected by one person who is infected, no? How many gets infected. So you will see here on the rightmost is that of measles, which is probably one of the most infectious diseases, where you probably have about 14.5 to a size 18 R naught. Okay, so if you have this kind of a disease entity, that would mean that you will need to have a threshold of about 95%, or 95% of the population should develop or have the immunity to be able to protect the other remaining 5%. So you will see here the ones for SARS-CoV-2, which has an R naught of roughly about 2 to 3, and that gives you basically needing to immunize about 50 to 60% of the population, a homogeneous population, to be able to protect the whole herd. Okay, next slide. Okay, there had been some noise in the recent past where you have what you call the infection-based herd immunity, wherein you allow low-risk population to become infected while sequestering the susceptible group. This very concept tells us that, okay, the lockdown has done a lot of bad for a lot of people economically and other things, mental health and other issues, no? But some would say that we may need to actually just allow the infection to go while protecting the susceptible group. Now, this concept of infection-based herd immunity is fraught with risk, as you know that the high-risk population can still become exposed to the low-risk population. So those who have very high fatality rate, those who will most probably die when they get COVID, will still get exposed to those who may be young and are low risk for mortality. So this had actually been the initial response of Sweden to the COVID epidemic in March 2020, but eventually they abandoned it because of the high incidence of even mortality. Recently, in October 2020, three prominent clinicians and epidemiologists actually met together and developed what they call the Great Barrington Declaration, where they said that let's allow those with low risk to actually get exposed to the virus so that they develop immunity, hoping that the whole herd can be protected when such a number would actually be reached. No? So this is what they call the focused protection. And within weeks of their declaration, there was actually a second memorandum, the Jan Snow Memorandum. And one of the first speakers is Rochelle Walensky from Massachusetts, wherein they said that this is not the correct way of preventing the illness, because in the United States, almost as high as about 40% of your population are high risk. So how can you really say that you're focusing on allowing the 60% to just go out? They may get exposed. You can still maintain some protection. However, that 40% can still be exposed to those who are low risk. So this is not a good way of developing herd immunity, because a lot of people can still die when they get exposed from the low risk to the high risk population. Next slide. So next slide. Okay, so for those who proposed the infection herd immunity, there had been some reactions to that, such that some of those mentioned says that there is no magic wand we can use here, meaning the COVID pandemic. We have to face reality. Never before have we reached herd immunity via natural infection with a novel virus such as SARS-CoV. Okay, SARS-CoV is no different from those previous infections. No, so it is not inevitable that we all have to get this infection. Okay, there are a lot of reasons to be very hopeful. If we can continue risk mitigation approaches until we have an effective vaccine, we can absolutely save lives. So these prominent epidemiologists are saying that we cannot allow the infection-based herd immunity to come in, to be used as a strategy and as a policy, but we still go back to the previous way, which is basically vaccination. Next slide. Okay, so herd immunity basically results from wide-scale immunization programs, as we have seen in the past. High levels of vaccination-induced immunity eventually benefits those who cannot receive or who cannot sufficiently respond to a vaccine, like immunocompromised individuals. So experts believe that this can be achieved by the second half of 2021 in probably the Northern Hemisphere. As we have seen, if you've had stockpiled for your vaccines and be able to deliver them to the high-risk population group, then slowly your herd immunity will be developing. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a mathematical model. I was trying to understand this, but this just tells you that in the first year of implementation of vaccine programs, what you will have to contend with is how good are the vaccines, how high or how efficacious are these vaccines in relation to the duration of the protection that they give. So initially, if you say that your vaccines are efficacious, 80%, good if it's 90%, and the duration is basically longer than what you expect, then in the first few months of your vaccination program, you'll be able to reach a relatively high herd immunity of about 80%. But through time, the second, the third, the fourth year, as you now have improved vaccines and hopefully a longer duration of protection, then you probably will have to vaccinate less of your community to be able to reach a higher herd immunity. Okay, next slide. So vaccines, next slide. So it is not just the vaccine which we have to contend with. Of course, we've known for those who are involved in public health policies that the community is basically not heterogeneous. There's a lot of mixing in some groups and there are less mixing in another group. We don't know the duration, the immunity of the vaccines that we have right now. The natural infection tells us that the IgG will probably be there for about 3 months, 4 months or so. We have heard of reinfection. So even if you've heard this infection already, it's possible. There have been case reports of at least 6 that they've been reinfected. So even if you've had it, it's possible to still get the infection. Of course, the description of how your program will be is very important. Your in-country vaccination program, we're trying to define the priority population who to vaccinate first. And the very big issue of vaccine hesitancy. No? We know very well that we're just coming from the problem of dengue, and here we have a lot of vaccine hesitancy going around. So we have to overcome even this particular problem. And we have seen that in the past several months of contending with the pandemic, a lot of services have actually suffered. You know? The TB program, the management of cancers, the HIV. We have seen patients not coming to the clinics because they're scared of the pandemic and they lose or they don't take their HIV medicine. So these will all be challenges even as we move on vaccinating as many in our population. So next slide. Okay, so this has been described already. So we move on that there is really a need for us to have a vaccine, for us to develop a program for the whole country for us to improve on our herd immunity. And we talked about the phase 3 efficacy trials as mentioned by Dr. Ted, Dr. Nina. These are all important as far as where to go for the program. Next slide. Okay, so let me just share with you regarding, so the landscape has been mentioned already regarding how many vaccines there are in clinical evaluation and how many are in preclinical evaluation based on the WHO landscape. Next slide. Okay, this had been mentioned already as some of the vaccines, and look at the dose and timing of some of these. It's 014, 021, 028. A good vaccine could have been a single dose vaccine, single or a double dose vaccine. Okay, but ideally in a pandemic, we should actually get a vaccine which should only be given as a single dose. Slide. So among all of these vaccines, the WHO actually developed a protocol wherein those who will probably be entering the phase 3 trials can be included in what we call the international randomized trial of candidate vaccines against COVID-19. So this is what we short term call it WHO SVT, or Solidarity Vaccine Trial, which we are actually getting into. Next slide. So the goal is to coordinate prompt, efficient, and reliable evaluation of the many preventive candidate SARS-CoV vaccines under development, to assess their safety and efficacy, and to identify those that are likely to be appropriate for deployment to influence the course of the pandemic. Next slide. Okay, so this is an adaptive design features of the SVT, which means a vaccine is not just tried one against the placebo, as what is happening now in the independent pharmaceutical trials. So independent pharmaceutical trials like Astra, Moderna, Pfizer, they went against one vaccine, their vaccine against a placebo, and they evaluated so many, after vaccinating so many people, they evaluated the outcome, the preliminary outcomes, and they came up with their vaccine efficiency. But in the SVT, or the Solidarity Vaccine Trial, what WHO will be doing is that they will probably get one vaccine tried against placebo, and then once you get the efficacy of this particular vaccine, you can probably drop the placebo, get another vaccine to be tried against the original vaccine. So now you have a positive control, and you have a new vaccine, and so on down the line, so that WHO is able to actually try as many vaccines at a shorter time frame with probably less cost. Okay, so that's how it will be with the adaptive design of the Solidarity Vaccine Trial. Okay, next slide. So the inclusion criteria for the Solidarity trials, at least 18 years old, in a high-risk population living in a community with an ongoing cases and spread. So in the Philippine setting, not just anyone can join the WHO vaccine trial. Okay, so where do we get this particular population, adults more than 18 in the high-risk population? Next slide. So what we're doing now in this particular trial is we're selecting barangays and communities with a population of more than 500, and the attack rates as reported by the Epidemiology Bureau of DOH of more than 1%, meaning 1 per 100, 1 COVID per 100 population, or roughly 1,000 COVID infections per 1,000 COVID positive over 100,000 population. Okay, so this is the criteria where we will be going for this particular trial. Next slide. Okay, so we've consulted WHO which of the barangays will be getting into to conduct this trial. Next slide. So here you will see the different regions and the different attack rates cumulative as of December 8. So you will see the ones in the yellow column that the National Capital Region remains to have the highest attack rate of about 1,500 per 100,000 population. So this is one of the criteria that we're using to select the barangays or the communities where the trials will happen. Next slide. So from here, we go down to specific barangays all over the Philippines. But since we know that the NCR is the highest attack rates, you will see here in column D, okay, the top barangays where we can choose to go to for this Solidarity Vaccine trials. So these are actually, this barangays have attack rates of more than 1,000 per 100,000 population. So if we will do the trial in a week's time, we will go to some of these barangays in Manila or in Caloocan City. The other sites, we have made them as possible backup, but WHO has recommended that if we will do the vaccine trial in the Philippines, basically it's in the National Capital Region in barangays where you have high attack rates, so more than 1,000 per 100,000 population. Next slide. So here, when you have chosen the barangay, the inclusion criteria has been satisfied, you actually will look at the exclusion criteria will be flashed later on. You vaccinate these patients, and then among those who have been vaccinated, they will be monitored every week until they develop any symptoms. So for those who develop symptoms, they will undergo the RT-PCR. That's when we say if they're positive, then that's the first primary endpoint. You now tell them that you develop COVID infection, okay? And therefore, you will not be counted as end of primary endpoint. Vaccinee develop positive COVID. For those who will not develop any infection, they will continue to be monitored until the end of the trial of about 12 months duration. Okay, so we have about 10 sites 8 to 10 sites in Manila right now being prepared for this trial. Next slide. Okay, so you have the list of exclusion criteria for those who will probably join the trial. Next slide. Okay, additional exclusion criteria. So the criteria is really very strict, no? So we will only include those that will satisfy all of this. Next. Okay, so as we mentioned, the primary endpoint is to evaluate the effect of each vaccine on the rate of virologically confirmed COVID-19. So globally, if we join the trial, if we now have so many patients enrolled in the trial vaccinated, globally you need to accrue about 150 events to develop COVID-19, after which that will trigger the initial evaluation of efficacy of the vaccines. I think that what has happened with your Pfizer and Moderna and Astra vaccines, no, there have been about 90 or 100 COVID events, and therefore they unblinded and tried to understand what is the efficacy of this vaccine. Next slide. Okay, you also have your secondary endpoints. As was mentioned by Ma'am Nina, the immune response, IgG, IgM. You will also check for the neutralizing antibody, and even for the viral shedding will have to be evaluated, and probably to even do genotyping on those patients who develop a positive SARS during the trial. Next slide. Okay, so it is at this point in time, WHO has not defined the assays that they will do on these specimens. So they've asked us to actually do specific blood collection and to preserve these cryo precipitates, cryo samples, so that even later on they will do the assays to determine what has happened to all of these patients. Next slide. Okay, so antibody levels, vaccine-induced immune responses, next slide, will be included as secondary endpoints, neutralizing antibody-levels as well as genotyping. Next. Okay, as was mentioned, safety will always be a primary objective to determine, because this is now phase 3. We have to evaluate how the vaccine is creating any adverse events on the body. Okay, next slide. Okay, so right now we have the following sites. UPPGH taking the lead together with Lung Center, San Lazaro, Manila Doctors, Medical City, St. Luke's, Global Makati Med. RITM will be a reference laboratory. The other centers are still under negotiation. For SOTO, in terms of the Cebu, Southern Philippines, for Davao and Baguio. So we look at where the epidemic is going, and we are just ready to actually activate these teams if ever the epidemic rises in those areas. Next slide. So what's the status now? There is the WHO core protocol. The SOPs, including ICF, are still being finalized. Unfortunately, they have not informed us which vaccine we will be using for this particular Solidarity vaccine trial. But they've mentioned to us that Colombia and the Philippines will most probably start joining the trial sometime January. Funding is coming from the DOST, DOH, WHO, as well as the Asian Development Bank. So we need to prepare, work closely with DILG to be able to go down to the grassroots level. So this will now be communities who will most probably receive the vaccines first before the rollout sometime 2021, middle of the year. So this is the trial. This is not yet the mass immunization that Dr. Ted was talking about that the government is planning. The vaccine expert panel of the ST, the SJREB, and FDA have been informed the upcoming submission. So the trial teams are being formed actively. The selection is being done by the WHO, the prioritization team. And we're still in consult with WHO regarding the sample size. At the moment, we're saying about 4,000 will be involved, but we are still, they're negotiating with us if you can increase the sample size. Site selection will most probably be made by end of December or first week of January. The tentative enrollment, first patient, first site is roughly about January 20, the middle of January 2021. Okay, so we are part of the Solidarity vaccine trial, and hopefully we can try 1 or 2 or even 3 vaccines, which hopefully later on can be included in the portfolio of vaccines which the government may want to consider in its procurement for vaccines for the Philippines. Next slide. So in 2020, it had always been the minimum health standards that we were following. We're very hopeful that in 2021, there is much hope for the vaccine. And hopefully all of us healthcare workers will receive the vaccines come 2021. So with that, we'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jodor Lim, no, from the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital, infectious disease expert and Philippine head of the Solidarity vaccine trial. So another brilliant presentation for all of us. And I hope you'll invite your friends to watch the playback. There is so much information that's coming into this webinar that I think, listening once is good, but if we want to attain mastery of our understanding, it'd be good to go and go back to the playback because there's really a lot of detail that is worth studying. Okay, so our last presenter is someone who's known to you, who's worked with us on the conceptualization of this webinar. We have with us an expert in health systems, and he's got actually he studied biotechnology and has co-hosted some of the webinars. So may I welcome Dr. Albert Francis Domingo, who is joining us in his personal capacity as a technical expert. Albert, welcome.
Thank you, Ma'am Susie, and hello to my classmate Raymond, and hello again, everyone. So switch roles na tayo.
Go ahead.
Right, thank you so much. So as I'm sharing my slides, I just wanted to say that similar to what Raymond mentioned, it feels like I'm back in medical school listening to my professors and actually refreshing. And this is a true story. While Dr. Gloriani and Dr. Lim and Dr. Herbosa were all speaking, I was frantically revising my slides kasi nakakahiya naman sa mga prof kung ang sasabihin natin is not updated. So, but having said that, this is an angle which I noticed that all speakers have been referring to in passing. Not because it is not important, but because this is not the focus of their talk. A lot of the discussions about vaccines for COVID-19 have focused on the vaccine itself. But if you notice, Dr. Herbosa, Dr. Gloriani, and Dr. Lim all always hint about something. I heard Dr. Herbosa said there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to program implementation. There are a lot of components in the program. There is a lot of considerations when it comes to the health system. And having said that, this is where I'm coming in with this presentation. most of what you've seen that the National Task Force and our frontliners have been doing has been towards the management, the contact tracing, the management thus far of COVID-19. We are at the second row. The vaccine comes earlier than that. The vaccine comes as part of primary prevention, hopefully to prevent the disease from developing in the first place. To avoid overlaps, you've already heard a lot of information on the safety and the efficacy needed. But now the question begins, what would be the principles in developing in rolling out this vaccine, in scaling up the administration and so on? WHO has been developing this immunization agenda 2030 together with partners and stakeholders. Also, I have to emphasize, I'm giving this in my personal capacity, although it is also familiar that I'm working with the organization. These core principles are behind the general plan on rolling out vaccines. It has to be people-centered, responding to the needs of the population. Countries must own it. It has to be really adopted by a country. Any strategy to roll out, any strategy to immunize must be adopted by the country. It should be partnership-based. You heard Dr. Arbosa mentioning that in his parting words, he would like to see the private sector to step up. So it's not always up to government, but across all sectors, both public and private. And of course, as you've seen with our previous two presenters, our experts when it comes to the vaccine, the science of the vaccines themselves, then we have data. It has to be data guided. It has to promote decisions rather have to be based on evidence. And having mentioned that, the strategies of the Immunization Agenda 2030. Remember, this document was drafted considering other vaccines, not COVID-19. They were talking here about vaccines for polio, vaccines for pneumonia, the usual vaccines that are part of the essential program of expanded program of immunization given by government and by the public health sector. But if you notice, all of the strategies were somehow accelerated when it comes to COVID-19, whereas the immunization agenda talks about preparing for outbreaks and emergencies. Well, we are already in an emergency. We are right in the middle of a pandemic, and that's the very reason why the COVID-19 vaccine is much anticipated and has to be rolled out. But looking at the other elements, the other strategic priorities also, we have to ensure there is commitment and demand. I've seen a few questions in the chat box about have we engaged the communities? Are we doing risk communication? Of course, we can buy all the vaccines we want, but if the people will not want to get vaccinated, or even if they do want, if they don't know where to get the vaccines or how to get the vaccines, then the vaccines might as well spoil inside our fancy, expensive cold chain, right? Now, what about coverage and equity? A lot of this was discussed by Dr. Lim when we saw the slide on the prioritization, and also by Dr. Arbosa as part of the overall plan. It's not about just choosing who can pay. As sadly as what always happens so far in healthcare, when someone can pay, the better quality comes. This time around, it has to be equal. It has to be equitable, not just equal, but equitable. There has to be deliberate steps to make sure that those who are most vulnerable will be the ones to probably be prioritized. We have to also look at supply and sustainability. A lot of the focus of Dr. Arbosa, he had a slide where there was a lot of details on operationalization, making sure that the vaccine comes in, there is adequate supply, and it doesn't spoil along the way, going to every particular area in the country that has to be vaccinated. And we do know, of course, that research and innovation has always been the source of this fascinating, fast-paced. Remember, the sequence just came out January 2020, and here we are, just shortly to 1 year from that time period. We're already talking about rolling out a vaccine. That is very fast, considering the rate by which vaccines have been developed before. I did not mention two things in this 7 strategic priorities. One would be the life course and integration. Well, for the simple reason that it's too early to determine what particular age groups. We do have a focus now, and it's clear that it's always for the adults. But as I always answer whenever I am asked by local government units, are we going to vaccinate children? Based on my basic understanding of the science behind it, I said the population groups that were tested on happen to be mostly, if not all, adults. So the data for vaccination when it comes to kids is not there. If I'm not, please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lim and Dr. Gloriani. But in public health, when we advise, because they are asking, so who's going to get vaccinated first? We always refer to the prioritization by government. And when they ask, why not the kids? I said, well, the science behind it is not yet clear. Even when it comes to the infection, the presentation of disease in kids, it's not as clear as in adults. But I'd like to call your attention to the overarching, literally overarching yellow bar at the top. The immunization program has to be part of primary health care. And of course, in the context of the Philippines, universal healthcare or universal health coverage. People often mistake that COVID-19 is a separate response program. No, everything that's happening is still part of UHC. The very fact that our systems are being strengthened or being tested and have to be ready for any particular second wave. Dr. Arbosa mentioned the possibility. Hopefully it won't happen, but a second wave might happen. So we have to be ready. We must not rely on vaccination as the be-all and end-all. I wanted to show this next slide now because most of the presentations before focused on what I call in clinical parlance, the pharmacodynamics of public health. Does the vaccine work? I'll leave Dr. Gloriani and Dr. Lim and the other experts to answer that and to debate on the finer merits and the data. But the more pressing question for us who are in health systems, how will the health system respond to the introduction of this vaccine? Mention has been made about safety, and the monitoring of adverse events. Of course, a judgment call has to be made. Some of you might have seen the news that I think in the US, the United States FDA has determined that the benefits outweigh the risks when it comes to administering the COVID-19 vaccine at the population level. That seems to be alluding already to what I would refer to informally as the pharmacokinetics of the public health system, of the health system as a whole. And what our speakers have been referring to, the pharmacotherapeutics. How are you going to deliver this working vaccine? Are we sure that we have the cold chain from importation at the Manila port all the way to administration, let's say, for example, in a far-flung barangay in Zamboanga del Sur, or in a far-flung barangay in Quezon Province? So these are all questions on the delivery, on the pharmacotherapeutics. How are we going to administer the public health intervention? And just to refresh, when we say health system, it's not a magical thing. It is a real thing. It comprises all the organizations, institutions, and resources that will produce the actions necessary to make sure that as a country, we are protected, we are immunized against COVID-19. And that's where it gets really interesting. This complex diagram is actually an oversimplification of how complex health systems are. At the core, in the middle, we want to supply the vaccine, and we want to make sure there are people who will ask for it, who will demand for it, and who will use it. And that's the only time when we can say that the action took place. But around that interaction between the supply of the vaccine, the demand of the population, would be a lot of communication, a lot of enforcement and regulation, a lot of laws, a lot of informal rules, membership organizations, advocates, not-for-profit sector. Of course, you cannot discount commercial interests as part of the game. The company needs to earn, of course, right? So when it comes to all of these things, health systems practitioners have to consider this as the vaccine comes in, with the goal of making sure that the prioritization, those who are in the priority list will get the vaccine that they need. And this one is more familiar in operational terms. I'm showing the 6 building blocks of the health system, which the WHO uses as an operational framework. And a lot of the components mentioned by Dr. Arbosa in his presentation deal with financing. There was a slide where he indicated possible sources of funding. Do we need to borrow money? Probably loans from international banks. Do we have money at least for a small set of for a small lot of vaccines? Maybe we do. Will PhilHealth be able to pay for the operational costs? Is this considered reimbursable under PhilHealth? Question mark. Let's see. We need to have health information systems. We need to have monitoring systems. It's not. By this time, my goodness, if we are still relying on paper-based systems, good luck to us. Of course, we know that we have made leaps and bounds in just a few months. The COVID tracker, no matter how much you hate or you love the results of the COVID tracker, is a result of a lot of hard work behind the scenes by health information systems people within DOH and also the local government units. And then you have governance and stewardship, which I will discuss in the next slide. Health workforce. Who's going to administer the vaccine out there? Have we already started training? As Dr. Lim alluded to, at least for the trials, for the Solidarity vaccine trials, WHO has not even indicated what particular vaccines will be tried out in the Philippines. When it comes to the rollout of the actual vaccination program, it is not yet clear as far as the NTF is concerned on which particular vaccine will be administered, although I did see a timeline from Dr. Urbosa according to quarter in 2021, but it's a lot of different vaccines. And as we do know from the lecture of Dr. Gloriani, different vaccines have different requirements. The temperatures are different. So all of those will have to be managed by not only the white coats, doctors, nurses, and midwives, but also supply chain managers, truck drivers who will be bringing these vaccines, maybe boat operators, captains, aircraft personnel who will be loading freezers. I don't know exactly how these will be transported, right? Now, that's also part of the box on the upper right, essential medicines and technologies, the supply chain. And having mentioned already the governance aspect, this is one of the favorite slides that we always show when it comes to describing the Philippine health system. Devolution is something that we have to live with at least until now in the era of the COVID-19 pandemic. We tried to fix it a bit with the universal healthcare law. Yes, we are still in the mode of integration, but COVID-19 struck and integration has not yet been completed. So this particular break, the dashed line, still remains. The good news is local government units, I have yet to hear of a local government unit who does not want to get out of the pandemic. So all of our provincial health officers, governors, all of our city and municipal health officers of our mayors are all cooperative and are all asking, when will the vaccine come? So when they also ask, what do we need to get ready for? Often one of the quick answers, do you know who the people in your neighborhood are? They will say, of course, we are the local government units. And then we remind them, do you have a target client list, which is aligned according to the priorities of the National Task Force? The 5 priorities, healthcare workers, I think indigent seniors, and then other seniors. I may be mistaken, but there's a specific sequence of who gets to be vaccinated. There has to be names and faces regardless of political affiliation. This is a reality on the ground, regardless of political affiliation. That list has to be completed so when the vaccine does come and the healthcare resources are all in place, we just keep on administering. So what should now be the roles and responsibilities of the major institutions, local government units? The action is on the ground. LGUs are the best resource when it comes to implementing simply because they are the ones there. They are the ones closest to the population. The barangay captains not only must be involved in the prevention, but also in the vaccine rollout. Of course, by logic, the municipal and city mayors, the provincial governors, and everyone in between, all of the health officers, all of the supply chain officers, all of the budget officers, they have to be primed as part of the planning. DOH, and that's nice to see that DOH is taking the lead as a technical agency as it should be by mandate, making sure that we are getting rather the best vaccine, the most affordable. And having mentioned affordable, what's going to be the role of PhilHealth? This is something that PhilHealth has to consider. Is it now a population-based service or an individual-based service? Is vaccination now preventive? Maybe, but then again, if in the outbreak setting, in the emergency setting where you are preventing healthcare workers from falling ill and the healthcare system from collapsing, maybe it is an intervention and not a preventive measure, rather a corrective intervention rather than a preventive measure. And the box underneath, even though it is small in my diagram, is actually bigger in the Philippines. Private sector providers. We already saw that the private sector has been leading in negotiations when it comes to purchasing vaccines, but it doesn't stop there, dear captains of business. You are requested earnestly to please also join, as Dr. Urbosa has mentioned, not just in the financing, not just in the purchasing and the advertising, but in the rollout, and also everything that comes after, pharmacovigilance, the monitoring of adverse events. Please be responsible also for your own patients, and please do not use profit or money. I'm sure a lot there are not here for the profit. It's all for service. Let us look and make sure that our countrymen get the vaccine as it comes along. Over to you, Dr. Susie and Raymond.
Thank you very much. It's Dr. Albert Domingo, another excellent presentation with another angle. I mean, I'm just reminded that of the saying that vaccines don't save lives. Vaccination programs save lives. And having been, when I was your age, Albert, I was actively involved in the eradication of polio, where millions of children were vaccinated all at the same time. In the time of Secretary Flavier, it was 9 million in one weekend. So I think as far as the Philippines is concerned, we do have muscle memory in terms of how to vaccinate, but meticulous planning and very strong leadership is needed to make everything happen. So I think we're going to bring back to the screen all of our guests. So we're going to have NIH Executive Director Eva. We're going to have Dean Nina Gloriani, Jodor Lim, and I think Ted may have left us already, and of course Albert Domingo. So there are so many questions in the Q&A box and in the chat, but I have a question first, and maybe this is for Dean Nina, and maybe for Jodor. Actually, when we think about the way vaccination rollout is prioritized, it's as if there is no ongoing pandemic. In short, I'm wondering, it's like it's looking at individual risks of so you're going to give the vaccine to individuals who are at risk. But we do know, and we have done this before for measles, we've done it for polio, that we use vaccination to control transmission. Meaning, instead of just looking at groups, you actually look at high transmission rates. Areas where you have high transmission, titirahin nyo yun, no? Para isasara nyo yung cluster na yon. Now, in the design of the Solidarity vaccine trial, that sounds to me more like the way we should, the way you select the people who you're going to involve in the trial. That sounds to me more like the way we should be rolling out the vaccine. That you should be looking at communities with high transmission rates. So, but I don't know. I mean, I'm going to ask Dean Nina to comment on that. So this is just sort of from the outside point of view. You want to use the vaccine. Of course, you want to protect people, but you want to control the spread. So are we thinking along those lines?
Yes, Dr. Susie, I'm glad you asked that question. Actually, in one of the webinars I also participated in, that was actually asked, what about the others? I said, the prioritization are just given as priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But should there be an outbreak or an increase in the number of cases anywhere in the Philippines, like what we are doing for the Solidarity, we have this concept of ring vaccination. I believe that the country has to do an outbreak response, much like we are doing for measles or for polio even. So that has to be, I think, more clearly articulated to everyone, that we are not confined to 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we are not.
Okay, great. Because it sounds to me like it's being rolled out like the EPI. You know what I mean? It's like it's being rolled out for routine, but we are in the middle of a pandemic. Okay. And I'm just going to use the time because I've got the microphone here. Because I noticed that my former professor in ethics at the University of the Philippines, wait, can I open the chat box? Okay. Professor Leonardo De Castro, my favorite teacher in ethics, many moons ago, asking, okay, so see, it's a great question, okay? When the conduct of trials in the country overlaps with the rollout of the vaccines, this is when the conduct of the trial overlaps with the rollout. So as Jod has mentioned, the trials will continue, but then there will also be a rollout, right? What is going to be done to those in the placebo arms? Will the vaccines that are given EUA still undergo ethics review? So, Joe, you might want to answer that.
Okay, the design basically of the SBT is that initially you have about 1, 2 active vaccines, and then you have 1 placebo. So the placebo becomes a shared placebo from 1 or 2 or 3 vaccines. What will happen is in about 3 months' time. So this will be a very fast enrollment. Like in a month's time, you can enroll 4,000, 10,000, 15,000, where you have you go to high attack rates, you enroll as many people, and then you follow through what happens in what, 2-3 months time, such that the numbers is expected to go that in that particular place. Now, in the interim, when you reach the global primary endpoints, what happens is that they will analyze how efficacious the vaccine is. Once they find out that this vaccine reaches their criteria for a vaccine efficacy of, let's say, 50-60%, what will happen is if there is now a second vaccine that is ready for rollout, the placebo actually gets out of the trial, okay, such that now you have a positive control, and then you have a second vaccine on trial. So initially you have one or two vaccines and you have a negative control, that's the placebo. Then eventually you have a good vaccine, you drop the placebo, you enter one or another two vaccines to be tried against the other and see that they work. Non-inferiority studies basically will happen after that. Now, if the rollout will happen, like say, we're thinking about what, by May, June, or even July, and the trial still is ongoing, it's the same question that we will be posing with WHO, because now you have an active or an efficacious vaccine. Why will you still continue with the placebo? We have not gotten an answer to that, because it would be logical that once you have that kind of vaccine, you probably just have to drop the placebo and use a positive control, one which is efficacious. But in the original trial, that's what they'll be doing. They drop the placebo and maintain this one which is efficacious as a positive control. Now, if this vaccine is found to be less than 30% efficacious, they will drop that vaccine and continue with another kind of vaccine into the trial.
Yeah, I think, Joe, they do that for clinical trials on cancer drugs also, right? So if you know, to test a new drug,
yes,
placebo gets the old drug, and the testing, and then you're blind, right? If you're on the trial, you could get the new drug, but you're getting a drug. You're not getting nothing. No, parang, yeah. But as you said, that hasn't been decided yet, right?
yes,
That will still be decided. Okay, so I saw a question again from a friend of mine, Carlito Galvez, who's one of the outstanding occupational health personalities in the private sector. He was asking earlier if the private sector can buy its own vaccines and use it outside of the criteria that's set by government. Ted's not here, but I'm wondering if someone can answer that question. Ma'am Nina or Eva, what do you think?
Doc Eva, would you like to answer first?
No, you answer first, ma'am.
Yeah.
And then I agree.
I think what has been drawn out so far is for government, the one that the government is putting money into, so we have prioritized it. But I believe that the private sector will have their own priorities, but they have to be aligned with the risk that these people will be exposed to, So it's not as if I want to immunize all your children. No, they have to look at the risk of these people that they are immunizing as well. So I think that's the bottom line there.
Okay, so the protocols in relation to safety, of course, will be followed. But yeah, so I think, and Albert, this goes to your what should I say? This goes to your comment around the way the health system responds, no? And again, no, this is like, again, we will see. I think we will see what happened with testing. Is that everyone, local governments, private hospitals, groups, will get their own source and they will use it. Because it's a free, what should I say? It's a free market, no? Parang the market will decide.
I'm
Although government will have priority. Sige, Albert, sagutin mo yan.
That's a very interesting thing, because when the FDA grants authority, whether by certificate of product registration or emergency use authorization, it allows the product to be on the market. And like you said, if anyone who can buy, and it's good and it's bad. It's good because if you have the money, sure, you will get it. But it's bad because you can choose not to follow the priority list. You can just vaccinate to the highest bidder. Now the problem is, and this is where it's a good forum for us to remind, like you said, Ma'am Susie, it's not the vaccine, it's the vaccination program that actually will protect. If and this is me speaking to someone out there who is thinking, I'm gonna bring all of my savings and buy vaccines for my family, please adhere to the priority list, because even if your family gets vaccinated, it's not a 100% guarantee that you will be shielded from the virus. If you go out there and someone out there was not vaccinated because you got the stocks for yourself, because you bought it out, and the priority list of the population vaccination was not followed, you are still going to be exposed to the risk. The herd immunity that was discussed will not be achieved. So sama-sama tayong lahat dito. Hindi to unahan na pag ako naturukan, bahala kayong lahat. Ako'y pwede nang maglakad-lakad sa mall. Bahala na, pwede na akong mag-Christmas party. Hindi po ganun yung bakuna. Sabay-sabay tayong dapat nababakunahan according to the priority list. And this is my last few words po on this comment. This is something that DOH and the government has to consider. Generally, we are a free market, but there are powers out there, there are legal instruments that they can invoke if they want to supervise the rollout even in the private sector.
Right. Okay. So I think, well, okay, another question that's come up. Thank you for that, Albert. No, I mean, it's always complicated everywhere. Okay. So I'm working outside of the Philippines right now, and I'm looking at a very complicated country. So it is complicated. We are not the only ones who are complicated. This is really, really very, very complicated. I have a question for Team Nina. No? What do we know of the period of protection?
Oh, right now, we do not know, even for COVID-19, that there are reports that the antibodies wane in about 2-3 months. So we do not know that yet, but more so with the vaccines until we gather enough, generate enough data until maybe 1 to 2 years later. But if we look at the experience with the first SARS-CoV-1 vaccine that was developed earlier, maybe when was that? Maybe 2005, 2006. The duration of immunity was about 1 year. So maybe with that, I don't know if it will be the same with this coronavirus, this SARS-CoV-2, but maybe with that, we may expect, they were not able to follow up after 1 year. So maybe we may need boosters like we need for flu. So we do not know that as of now.
So it might be like a yearly flu.
It should be like that, yes.
You have to take 2 shots. Raymond, you wanted to ask a question. Go ahead, please.
Actually, I have 2 questions, but I'm trying to, multiple questions, but I'm trying to merge them. One of the earliest questions that we had that was emailed to us to the stopcovidex@up.edu.ph, and it's something that we have discussed over the National Institutes of Health, and in light of the fact that NIH will be helping out the FDA for the review, I'd like to ask Executive Director Eva po, why is the Philippines not participating in terms of manufacturing the vaccines? Will there come a time wherein we will be ready to do that, not just for this pandemic, but for future outbreaks that will happen?
Thank you, Raymond, for your question. I think there's been we've had some scoping meetings earlier on, and that's together also with Professor Gloriani, because we wanted to see, like, putting in various stakeholders together and find out exactly the answer to your question. I think for this present pandemic, definitely, if I may say, Dr. Gloriani, we are not ready for large-scale manufacturing, but we are, the concentration of the efforts is towards the clinical trials. But of course, we won't stop there. I think we are trying our best with a there's going to be a funding for a vaccine institute, Ma'am Nina, right? And so this can start probably not for this pandemic, but for because this will not be the end of the pandemics. We know that there will be more to come, but hopefully not very soon. However, we have to prepare the infrastructure, the people, the experts who will be placed in such an institute where vaccine development can happen, not only for pandemics, but also for manufacturing all the other vaccines, like measles vaccine, polio. We should have the capacity to do that for our country.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm going to chime in on that, Raymond, because
Go ahead, po.
1990, when I was working in the government with when I was chief of staff with Secretary Romualdez, we already proposed a vaccine manufacturing plant in the Alabang area, the biological production service. But somehow, and we proposed to have regional biosafety level 3 laboratories in 1990. How many years ago was that? Oh my goodness, that shows how old I am.
30 years ago.
Huh? 30
30.
years ago, we actually had a turnkey project with another country. It was a public-private partnership, and we were going to manufacture BCG and DPT. And we had proposed several biosafety level 3 laboratories. So hindi tayo nagkukulang ng vision. I think what happens is, when governments change, then everything gets washed away, even if it's needed by the country. So I'm sorry, I ranted a little bit, but it's not like we haven't thought about this. We knew long ago, and we have 2 million babies who are born every year. We're importing the vaccines for that. This is not acceptable. So I think maybe if something good can come out of this pandemic and this discussion, I hope matuloy na talaga yung vaccine production natin, because everyone else is doing it except us. And this just really requires political will and tenacity on the part of the health sector not to drop the ball. Sorry,
Correct.
May I add to
It's
that?
okay.
Yes.
Nina. Go
Well,
ahead, po.
actually, the Department of Science and Technology is has prepared a short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan for vaccine development in the Philippines. Of course, the short-term is us participating in the clinical trials, but medium-term, the reason some of these vaccine developers are up in the list is because they have plans of actually setting up or establishing at least a fill and finish manufacturing. So they are sort of prioritized because they will be here for some time and eventually to actual vaccine development for the long term. So maybe the OSP can be asked about details about that. That is all mapped up.
Great.
Thank you, Dean Gloriani. One of the things also was that we keep on talking of clinical trials. I'm not sure everyone caught it, but Executive Director Eva mentioned that in our new building at NIH, we will be having a clinical trial center. Maybe Ma'am Eva can give a few words po about it.
Well, as I mentioned, hopefully by early 2022, this clinical research center which is envisioned as a key resource for clinical researchers, providing the infrastructure, the personnel, technical support to conduct end-to-end clinical trials to candidate vaccines and novel drugs. And because it's positioned at the NIH, although primarily it will be serving the Philippine General Hospital, the trial is in the Philippine General Hospital, but we would like it to be, there will be a network that will be established, so it will be open to other institutions around the country. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I think
Thank you, Ma'am Eva.
I'm mindful of the time and we want to honor the
Yes,
time.
ma'am. Opo. Opo. We'll just have one more question, Ma'am Susie, if it's okay. I've combined the question from Dr. Ross Alvaro and from Dean Glorianis Katukayo, who is one of the top health social scientists in the country, Nina Castillo Carandang. The question is, Last night there were reports about AstraZeneca vaccines affecting the spinal cord. Pfizer vaccine recipients reportedly had Bell's palsy and are now in the process of assessing high risk populations. And in tying that up with the question of Dr. Nina Castillo Carandang, what are the efforts that we are currently conducting or partnering with other stakeholders in order to have an effective risk communication, maybe combat vaccine hesitancy, that sort of thing. I'll go to Dean Gloriani po and then maybe Dr. Jodor because he
Or
leads the
Dr.
clinical
Jod can
trial.
start kasi he's
Dr. Jod, go ahead,
working
go ahead
with
po.
DOH Health Promotions Bureau.
Okay, thank you, Raymond. Basically, it's a big problem that we're facing now because of what has happened with dengue Baksha very recently. So when we were preparing for the trial, what we did was to talk with the DOH communications team headed by Dr. Beverly Ho to really plan out how we will roll out the clinical trials. Remember, we have the WHO vaccine trials, but we also have several independent vaccine trials. Also, all of this will basically be affected if the community will not be ready to join this trial. So we requested them to develop that program, manage the expectation of the communities, even the local government leaders, in terms of what happened with dengue vaccine and how will this be in terms of the COVID vaccines. So there's an active working relationship with this group, and they came out basically with all of these materials, communications materials, such that when we will now go to a community, the community is prepared to actually receive the trial. So from the mayor down to the barangay captain, other leaders of the community. So that's what we're doing now. And of course, we know that these are new vaccines. We still don't know a lot about the adverse events. So there have been reports from abroad, but we will need to see from our participants how it will be, and probably be on the lookout for all of these adverse events in our own population. So we'll have to manage all of these things even as we move on with the trial.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Raymond, I just wanted to add something. No? Sorry, nagiging parang reactor ako dito. No? Oh, but no. But as I said, we have muscle memory for vaccination, and I think the latest success of the Department of Health in coverage for measles and polio, despite everything, shows that we don't have the problems of the northern hemisphere in terms of anti-vax. Okay, I think, and I go back again to the time I was Albert's age and Raymond's age, working with Secretary Johnny Flavier. There was a strategy for communication, and it was very simple. It was 3 M's: mayors, midwives, and media. He would campaign around the country, and those were the only 3 groups he would talk to. He would have dinners with broadcasters, he would meet all the midwives, and he would sit down with the mayors. So in communication, it is very important that we have a strategy. And I think that is where we are faltering. We are faltering in many public health problems. We, the world, no, I'm not talking about the Philippines. The world is faltering because of lack of good communication strategy. So I think if we study back what was done in the eradication of polio, the national immunization days, and there are people in the Department of Health who led that campaign who are still around. There is knowledge, there is wisdom, and there is understanding of how this can be done. So I'm optimistic. I think we just need to honor our past, go back and take a look at how we've done things. We've done this before. This is not new. This is not new, and we know how to overcome these challenges.
Yeah.
Raymond, mag-post ka na nga. Nagko-commentary ako dito bigla.
No,
Go
it's
ahead.
okay.
I
I think Dean Gloriani has something to say.
Yes, the Health Promotions Bureau actually has a core team that includes all other agencies. So they have this pre-launch actually mainly for the clinical trial, but maybe later for the rollout as well. So pre-launch, launch, and post-launch of the clinical trial, and then the rollout. So actually, some of their messages have been put in the web somewhere. I think it's clinicaltrials.gov. Sorry, I really do not know the actual name, But it's there, and they are working with the Philippine Information Agency and later with the PCOO for all of this. So Dr. Jod will be working with them when he goes to the community because that's very important. So it's there, but maybe it's not widely publicized as yet.
Very nice din, Gloriani. I think we could reactivate po the strategy of the 3 M's and hope that we could reach more people in terms of getting the accurate information and being able to combat vaccine hesitancy. Okay, so at this point po, maybe we could have our polls be flashed again on the screen. We just wanted to get a sense po of what people were looking at. The questions po have been nominated by our panelists. Question number 1 states, a vaccine that has 94% efficacy means, ito po, ang kanilang pinili po is of 100 vaccinated in the trial, 94 do not get COVID. That's what most people, how most people understand it. Maybe Dr. Jodor can, can give comments po on that.
Yeah. 100 vaccinated in trial and do not get COVID, 94% are protected for life. Okay, so yung second question kasi 92nd is 94% of vaccine are protected for life. This we still do not know the answer. The protection rate of the natural infection has not been established if it's for life. I don't think it's for life. We have reinfections that have been reported already. So the first answer is of those 100 vaccinated in trial, 94% didn't get COVID. Basically, that's how it is with the definition that we use for the trials, no? So vaccine efficacy. Okay, but in real life, that will have another issue in terms of other aspects of the vaccination program. But strictly, that can be used as a definition. No, 94% do not get COVID. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Jodor. Next up is on herd immunity. So the options are herd immunity can be achieved when 80% are vaccinated against COVID-19. Number 2, herd immunity is permanent. Option C, herd immunity is readily attained within a year after vaccination. And the last one is none of the above.
Okay, I will most probably go for, well, it's the 80% it's just a number. Basically, it changes over time. Initially, you will have a difficult rise in your herd immunity because it's a new virus that we're dealing with. It takes a very good vaccine, a good vaccination program before you can actually increase your herd immunity to 80%. No, but it's not a number. No, it's about 50, based on the calculation of a homogeneous population, it's about 50 to about 67% that you need. No. For sort of the immunity for COVID, but there will be issues along the way where it's not 100% efficacious. In real life situation, you will have problems with the vaccination program. You will have susceptible individuals which may not respond well to the vaccine. So it probably will change over time in terms of the herd immunity. It's not just a number, it changes over time. But it's a good goal that we have at 80%.
Thank you for that, Dr. Jodor. Well, because some people have this misconception po that it's permanent. So thank you for that last statement. And then finally, target groups for the first round of vaccination against COVID-19. 84% of respondents chose health workers and older persons at risk. But yun po, it's something that has already been mentioned in the presentation by Dr. Ted Herbosa and also by Dean Gloriani and Dr. Jodor. So maraming salamat po sa lahat po ng mga sumagot sa ating opinion poll. And at this point, I'll give the floor over to Dr. Susie to ask for the parting message of each of our speakers po.
So we're going to ask everyone to say a few words in closing to all the health workers who are watching us from all over the country, doctors, nurses, pharmacists. Daming nanonood sa atin. Ano? So we start with Eva. What are your last few words for our audience?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Susie. I think it's really for us, the country, to achieve self-reliance and self-sufficiency in the long term. That would be my message, that we should all put our efforts together to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dean Nina.
Oh, well, for me, for those who think that vaccine is the end of all of this, please no. Please take care of yourselves. Take all the precautions. This pandemic will last longer than you could imagine. So please, all the public health, the health precautions you can take. Thank you.
Thank you. Jude.
Okay, so I agree with Ma'am Nina. The vaccine and the vaccination program is just part of the preventive efforts. We all have to do our part. Let us not lower our guards. Not today, not in the future. Not yet. Malayo pa tayo, marami pa tayong dadaanan.
Thank you very much. Albert.
Thank you, ma'am. Sa health system, sinasabi natin na para magbago yung paraan, how we do things, kailangan ginugulat. Dumating yung COVID-19, nagulat tayong lahat. Di natin in-expect na ganito kalala. And we're not yet done, as Dr. Nina said. So habang ginagawa natin yung mga vaccine, yung ating mga precautions, sana wag nating kalimutan. Let's not forget the lessons that we have learned as we move through the pandemic. And hopefully, we will be stronger, we will be wiser when it comes to preventing the next pandemic, because there are still many other viruses and organisms out there.
Thank you very much, Albert. All right. So we've got closing remarks by the Dean of the College of Medicine of the University of the Philippines. So Dean Charlotte, please take the floor.
Unmute si Ma'am.
You're on mute, Dean. Sorry.
Charlotte, nakamute ka.
Well, thank
Go
you
ahead,
for
ma'am.
inviting me to give the closing remarks. It's been a very educational program. We have had a lot of interest in vaccines regarding COVID. We started off with Dr. Ted Herbosa, representing Secretary Carlito Galvez, giving us a comprehensive view of the roadmap for the National Immunization Program against COVID that's being laid out by government and for possible implementation. And we have been informed that advanced market commitments have been allowed due to an executive order executed by our president for procuring vaccines. We are now aware that there's about 2.3 million doses through partnership with the business sector, but we have been given a 73 billion loan by ADB and World Bank in order to procure the vaccines. But the 7 steps that he mentioned are important. Scientific rigor for screening all the vaccines, whether they are effective and efficacious, the acquisition parameters, the procurement parameters, the shipment and storage of these vaccines are important, how we distribute and deploy these vaccines, and the overall implementation vis-a-vis the other vaccine implementation programs of government and other healthcare programs, as well as how to monitor and evaluate the adverse events, and perhaps even have some funding in order to cover for this, either from PhilHealth or other funding agencies. Former College of Public Health Dean Gloriani gave us a review of the different vaccines and of the 5 that they have evaluated so far in the vaccine expert panel of the OST. How safety is evaluated both in the laboratory and how efficacy determined in trials through measures of immune markers, including cytokine assays and cell-mediated neutralizing antibodies. My classmate, Dr. Jodor Lim, who's the lead for the WHO Solidarity Vaccine Trials, who's also our infectious disease expert in UPPGH, talked about herd immunity with a review of the currently used vaccination for children to protect the older population, having the need for 50 to 67% for herd immunity, and looking at the first year of looking at how efficacious the vaccine is and the duration of the immunity, so that we can reach perhaps 80% within 1 year, if these are really very effective and efficacious vaccines. But we need to look at vaccine hesitancy. He has rightly mentioned that we still are reeling from the effects of Denvaxia and other collateral health programs that have been affected by this. He described the adaptive features for the vaccine trials that will be implemented by WHO. He also mentioned about the need for collaboration with the Epidemiology Bureau of the Department of Health in order to map out how the vaccine trials and which barangays the vaccine trials will be implemented. And also to look at the high rates of COVID in these barangays in order for us to be able to ensure monitoring of these communities, looking at both primary and secondary endpoints for this, and as well as the collaboration with other private hospitals, not just UPPGH. All our speakers actually emphasize safety as the prime objective. And our last presenter, Dr. Albert Francis Domingos, an expert in health systems, reminded us that vaccine is really for primary prevention. And so should utilize the principles that have been laid out for rollouts, including partnership between national and as well as private interests, as well as data-driven and evidence-based programs. He mentioned about the strategy that should include, of course, community engagement at the highest level, looking at risk communication, not only just who can pay, but actually looking at it being equitable or for public good. Research and innovation that should be maintained as a backbone. And this was clearly showed by China sharing the genetic sequence early on, so that we now have um, a lot of vaccine under development. Testing of adults that have been done and not really on children, so that we may have to look at that as well in order for science to be clear. And that universal healthcare should really underpin all of this in order to strengthen our healthcare system, including the 6 building blocks like sustainable health financing, health information system, people-centered integrated system, essential medicines and technology, healthcare workers, and of course, governance and stewardship. We all learned a lot thanks to our speakers and our organizers. It needs a whole of society, a whole of government approach. We need to define what will be the role of PhilHealth. Will they only finance the adverse events, or can they consider this as a primary intervention in order to ensure the healthy status of all Filipinos? Coverage for vaccination will have to be considered, and I think that long-term sustainability of the program might rest on that. Private business captains should not only look at rollout, but also look at monitoring, and that profit should not be the prime consideration, but really the public good to be enjoyed by all Filipinos. Thanks, Dr. Susie, for mentioning the 3 M's during the stint of Dr. Secretary Flavier. The 3 M's, midwives, mayors, and media will have to be included in the conversation for this to be really widespread. For the eradication of polio, which was really a success, that muscle memory should be harnessed with great optimism. We as a people can really do this. Health promotion should be intensified now as we speak, and media should help us with this risk communication and community engagement. But lastly, let us all dream of a vaccine self-sufficiency, because that really, I think, is the way forward. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That's Dean Charlotte Chong of UP College of Medicine, always very inspiring and visionary. Thank you for that closing. Raymond, you have some announcement, I think.
Also, yes. So part of the polls that you are seeing now, thank you for those who keyed in their answers as part of the assessment of our panelists. As always, all of our panelists garnered more than 90%. Very strongly agree po with regards to everything that they've mentioned, the knowledge that they have gained for this webinar, and how they were able to deliver it with accurate information, very, very audible, and not too jargony in terms of the content po. What you are now seeing in terms of the polls will be our special topics that you might be interested po in nominating for the year 2021. As mentioned po, we are not stopping in the year 2020 with the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series, and we hope that you will also continue to watch us and view us starting next year. The questions that are mentioned here really boil down to the following: the topics that you would like to be discussed in the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series in year 2021. What are your top 3 choices? And we are seeing that at least for the third one, there seems to be a tie for the last one, but part 1 po na talagang patok na patok is really parang part 2 of our vaccine special topic, the progress in the development of vaccine for COVID. Next up po are the issues on patient management of allied health professionals in the time of COVID-19. That would be our physical therapists, our respiratory therapists, nurses, dentists, and also there are questions that we would like to be asked in relation to the laboratory and diagnostics of COVID-19, the psychosocial impact of COVID-19 and COVID-19 in the rural areas. So please keep on keying in your answers po for this one. As I move over to Dr. Susie, who will give maybe the final preview for our final webinar in the year 2020 po.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond. I think some of our participants are actually suggesting some topics on the chat box. You can do that. So if you, we're doing the planning for next year, and if you have some suggestions, we're very open. Please put them in the chat box. All right. So next week, Raymond is very interesting. Throughout this webinar, I've been thinking about Dr. Flavier. And I guess I was really very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with him for a long period of time. And this is my segue to the topic next week. Okay, so next week, all right, we've been featuring tertiary hospitals. Philippine General Hospital, we've had the Lung Center, recently we had NKTI. We are going to take next week a case from the Doctors to the Barrios program. So we've been talking about kind of state of the art, what do you do? And some of the comments we get actually are, it's great you can do all of those things in PGH, but what about us? We don't have anything, right? So we're going to have a case that's presented by a doctor to the Barrios. And I think next year we plan to intersperse our discussions with this to sort of get a balance and also show what kind of resourcefulness and what kind of compassion and dedication our doctors in the field have in the time of the pandemic when dealing with all kinds of issues. So actually, the case next week is the case of a farmer who developed some kind of a lesion on the skin, but the lesion ate into the lip and the mouth and became a huge ulcer and was seen by a doctor to the Barrios. So we'll be ending our year webinar series with a topic, with a rural case. And I think that also is to just put our feet firmly on the ground, that in many places, what is needed to manage even the most simple cases is not available, to remind us of that, and that we must have an equal commitment and dedication to see to it that everyone has access to care. So be with us again next Friday. We're going to have somebody talking from the Doctors to the Barrios program, and it will be about a farmer with cancer. Raymond, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Susie. And not to preempt it, but it will be a case po down south from Mindanao. And we are very, very fortunate that this got nominated through coordination po with the UP Manila Community Health Development Program. I believe Director Anthony Cordero was also one of our attendees for this particular webinar. So maraming salamat po. And I hope na marami pa rin po ang natuto dito po sa ating webinar. And we're very, very happy and really appreciate that we still have over 300 who have stayed even though we went over time for this particular special topic webinar. So maraming salamat po at magkita-kita po ulit tayo next week. Same time, same channel. So on behalf of the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series, I'm Dr. Raymond Francis Sarmiento. Keep safe, keep healthy, and see you online.
The enemy remains unseen. I'll keep your hand in mine. Let's say a prayer one more time. I know you long for home, but I am here, you're not alone. I'll stay with you until the coast is clear. The others pain before my fears, the others laugh before my tears. But right behind the mask, I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? Oh God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'm here to hold the line. I'll keep my word until my time. Just look into my eyes and say his name to realize it's fine to be afraid. Just hold on to the word he gave. this time will come to pass, 'cause His salvation's made to last. He'll carry you to see the break of day. The others pain before my fears, the others vows before my tears, but right behind the mask I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? But God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'm here to hold the line. I'll keep my word until my head's died. The others pain before my fears, the others laughs before my tears, but right behind the mask I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? But God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'll keep my word, your word is mine. The others pain before my fears, I'm pushing on despite the tears. Please take us through another day. Just hold my hand, and I will hold the line. I will hold